It's bank holiday weekend. Time to put on the shorts, fire up the Barbie. And if Donald Trump is to be believed, that foreign holiday may now be safe. The Straits of Hormuz could be open in days. The president says there's a deal, but it takes two to tango. Tehran is urging caution. On the other hand, back home, everybody would prefer the boats to stay where they are. But it seems that the English Channel is wide open for business. And if you're heading out for some fun, Rachel Reeves is lightening your financial burden. There's 82 pence off the entry ticket. Enough for at least half a bag of Haribos. Yay. For the Government View, we'll hear from the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, Darren Jones. Reform promises to scrap income tax on overtime. We'll do the sums with its Treasury spokesperson, Robert Jenrick. And from the Conservatives, I'll be speaking to the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Dame Priti Patel. Has the issue of Russian sanctions damaged the relationship between the UK and Ukraine? I'll be joined in the studio by the Ukrainian MP, Kira Rudik. Plus, with us throughout the show, the political commentator and Reform UK supporter, Tim Montgomery. The former advisor to Boris Johnson, Joe Tanner. And the former Labour advisor, John McTernan. Welcome to a warm Sunday morning with Trevor Phillips. As we come on air, the details of the proposed Iran deal are gradually leaking out. In a moment, we'll talk to our correspondent in the Gulf to get the latest. But for once, Donald Trump isn't generating the only political drama in town. We don't yet know how long our Prime Minister has in office, but increasingly it looks as though his fate depends on the outcome of the Makerfield by-election. If Labour wins, it's game on for a leadership contest which the bookies reckon he'll lose. If Reform wins, then the road to number 10 looks wide open for a future Premier, Nigel Farage. But oddly enough, the sharpest political tensions aren't between left and right, but within each wing of politics. On the left, a split is emerging between those who want the UK, in effect, back in the EU, and those who want to keep the red lines of no customs union, no common market, and no freedom of movement. Most of this is performance art, since right now, nobody in the EU wants us back. In pretty much every European language, the words United Kingdom translate into a phrase meaning massive pain in the backside. And even if they did offer a deal, it would cost us billions that we don't have. On the right, there's what you might call the deportation game. Reform and Restore, a splinter group to its right, are competing to build up the number of people they can throw at the country. But given that Shabana Mahmood is now overseeing the most dramatic drop in migrant numbers for a decade or more, there's a slight feeling of two bald men wrestling over a comb. Well, we'll be poring over all that with our guests and panel shortly. But first, let's get the latest on that Iran deal. Our correspondent, Sally Lockwood, is in Dubai with the latest on this for us. Good morning, Sally. What do we know?
Good morning to you, Trevor. Well, certainly I'd say there's a sense of caution more than relief this morning in this region. We have been braced for the last week or so for a potential second wave of American military operations. Donald Trump had made that threat several times. So I think there is a sense of relief that we're at least talking about more potential diplomatic talks this morning and not more military strikes. Don't forget, it's just a week ago, it was just last Sunday that the UAE's nuclear power plant was hit in a drone strike, one of several violations of the ceasefire. The UAE has been hit hard in this war, and that was a first attack on the country's nuclear power plant, potentially a warning from Iran that they can still target really sensitive, critical infrastructure and targets in this region, despite having been hammered militarily in this war. So very few people in this region wanted to see another wave of military strikes from the US. So I would say it is promising that we're at least reporting on diplomatic efforts this morning. But I would say that the news coming out of Iran this morning via the Tasnim news agency is already showing fairly large cracks in terms of what both sides are willing to agree on when it comes to this memorandum of understanding. Donald Trump announced that the Strait of Hormuz would reopen under this latest proposal with no tolls being charged by the Iranians. Well, the Iranians are saying that is not the case, that the Strait of Hormuz will not return to pre-war conditions, that essentially they want to have sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz, and that the exact details of what that would involve will be announced. But it sounds like they want to continue charging these eye-watering tolls in exchange for safe passage, which is something very few people, very few countries would be willing to accept, certainly not Gulf states. And Donald Trump has said that's not something the US is willing to accept either. Tasnim news agency has also made, well, a number of announcements this morning, but two that really caught my eye. And one is that under their conditions for this memorandum of understanding, they are also requesting that American troops essentially be removed from neighboring countries around Iran. That is not something I can see the Americans agreeing to. And then the other key thing that they've said is that Iran has not yet accepted any actions on its nuclear program, despite this report from Axios revealing details that among the US conditions, Iran would essentially commit to never having a nuclear weapon and would hand over its stockpile of enriched uranium. So the big issue, the biggest issue when it comes to Iran's nuclear program, it seems there's been absolutely no movement at all this morning. And from what we're hearing from both sides, it feels like they're still very far apart in terms of what they're willing to agree on. So I would say, yes, people are optimistic that we're not seeing a return to military strikes this morning, but I wouldn't say there's a huge amount of confidence that we won't see that again in the future.
So, in essence, what we're getting is a 60-day pause to try to see if we can make any progress, though we haven't made any in the 3 months, I suppose, this has been going on.
Yeah, it certainly sounds that way. And we've heard this many times throughout this war from Donald Trump. He makes these statements either on Truth Social or in comments to reporters about what he wants to see happening. It appears Donald Trump is desperate for an off-ramp when it comes to this war. But the Iranians appear very, very unwilling to cede any ground, especially when it comes to their strongest hand that they have, the most powerful weapon that they have when it comes to their de facto control at the moment over the Strait of Hormuz.
Sally, keep us posted during the day and we'll see where this moves. Sally Lockwood in the Gulf. Well, let's get stuck into our interviews this morning. I've been speaking to the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, Darren Jones. Darren Jones, what does our government make of the announcement overnight that we may be near a deal on Iran?
Well, look, we hope that that is the case. This is news that's come in overnight. And, of course, we'll be continuing to work with our partners and allies to make it the case. As we've said from the beginning, this is a war that we did not want to happen. We've had to prepare ourselves for the domestic implications of the conflict in the Middle East on the UK economy. And the sooner we're able to get to a point of de-escalation and, crucially, get the Strait of Hormuz open again for the flow of oil and trade, the better for all of us.
If there's a need to somehow guarantee tranquility, let's call it, in the Gulf, you've been saying that we won't be dragged into someone else's war and so on, but will we be prepared to contribute to, let's say, some kind of peacekeeping force?
I'm not sure that that's on the table right now. I mean, we have long-standing defence partnerships with countries in the region anyway, as well as British military bases there, which we've talked a lot about in the last few weeks as this conflict has flared up. But I think what is really in question here is how we get the Strait of Hormuz open, how the Americans and others can help to clear mines that may have been laid in the Strait of Hormuz so that commercial shipping companies have the confidence again to be able to travel through it. OK, let's go on to quite a rare thing, good piece of news for the government. Not that rare. Every week there's good news. We just need to talk about it more.
Let me ask the question first. Let me show you pictures from last night. These are pictures in Dover last night. You've reduced the flow across the channel. You've got migration numbers down to their lowest. But You haven't smashed the gangs and you haven't stopped the boats, as you promised.
Well, we've made a lot of progress. There's absolutely more to do. There's no question about that. We've had over 60,000 failed asylum seekers now return to their country of origin. You remember under the previous government, the returns process wasn't working at all. We've now closed over 50% of the asylum hotels that we'd inherited from the last government, and we're clearing through the backlog of applications very quickly. And boat numbers have fallen this year. But
so far,
but we've got to do more with our French partners and others, including tackling these criminal gangs, to make sure that that is a continued trajectory. And I think that's good. We're making progress on those issues. But you're right that the public at home want to see an end to it. They want to see control in our borders, which is what we're reinstating. And they want to make sure that people who don't have the right to be here are asked to go home, compared to those who maybe have the right to be a student or have a work visa, or are genuine asylum seekers looking for refuge and support.
This is, if you like, the visible side of illegal immigration. But we know that the political heat around this isn't just about this specific thing. It is about overall immigrations. And I said, you know, you've had a rare success. The numbers are down to their lowest for net immigration down to lowest for 5 years. But looking at the component, student numbers are steady, and asylum claims, 88,000, pretty much the same as they were last year. What actually we're seeing is the Conservatives' achievement because of the restriction on visas they brought up. It's a bit cheeky for you to have claimed this success as yours, isn't it?
Well, we've made a number of changes since coming into government, including on...
But the fall is the result of what the Tories did.
I wouldn't attribute it solely to that. But you have to remember the Conservatives had to bring in these changes in the first place because of the so-called Boris wave, where they essentially opened the borders and let hundreds of thousands of people come into the country to take jobs that local workers could have taken here in the UK. Now, we're always grateful to people who came here to do that work, especially in health and social care, but that was not a sustainable trajectory, which is why Yvette Cooper as Home Secretary and Nashrabana Mahmood as Home Secretary have made it very clear that we expect employers here in the UK to invest in training and job creation for people who might be out of work at home in the UK first, before they can recruit overseas.
Yeah. Let me just check one thing, though. You're planning, as part of the changes that you say you're making, to make settlement, technically speaking, indefinite leave to remain, more difficult to achieve, and you want to police it more stringently, more interviews and all that. That's been described by Angela Rayner as un-British. Is she wrong? And if you think she's wrong, can you guarantee that this policy won't change during this Parliament?
So the policy that Shabana Mahmood has put forward on behalf of the government is that settlement should be in return for contribution. It's not that you can't settle, it's just that you should be here for longer, in work, paying taxes, before you have the right to permanently stay here and then access public services in the future. And to be honest, I think if you talk to any average voter about that across the country, they would say that that's perfectly sensible.
And you are going to keep that policy for the rest of this Parliament?
Yes, that's the policy that the government's bringing forward. Of course, we're consulting at the moment. That consultation hasn't ended yet, so the Home Secretary may refine details or change details depending on the outcomes of the consultation. But the trajectory of the policy that the government set out is the right one.
The politics of this are complicated, but one fact overall stands out to me, which is that whatever success is achieved, the public doesn't feel it. Recent data shows that despite the fact that the annual migration numbers are down, to 170,000 thereabouts, net migration down to 170,000, 49% of the public thinks that the numbers are up. Only 16% accepts that they are going down. Government's going to pay a political price for not being able to explain what's going on, isn't it?
Well, my sense of what's going on there is that what people are experiencing in their local communities is the consequence of the last number of years, where there has been a significant increase in overseas people settling here in the UK. Now, those who are settled here with the legal right to do so. But I suspect that what we need to do more of going forward is think much more proactively as a government about how we help with integration and social cohesion and interfaith work, and we make sure that people are able to feel part of an integrated community where everybody contributes and we gain value from that diversity and that contribution. But we're going to have to do more of that than we've done in the past.
One issue, of course, that affects all of this is our relationship with the EU. The EU says if we want better trade terms, and Prime Minister's been pretty clear, we want to be close to Europe and all that. The EU says that if we want better relations on trade, we have to accept a closer relationship on freedom of movement, on immigration. When do you plan to abandon the red lines against increased freedom of movement?
So we're not abandoning them. And the EU's always been very clear that if you want, for example, integration fully into the single market, they expect countries to accept freedom of movement in return for that. That is not what we're going to be doing. We had very clear red lines in our manifesto, and we'll be sticking to them.
OK. Let's talk about something that came up this week. I heard the Prime Minister's explanation that the decision to defer the start of new sanctions on Russia was effectively business as usual. So we don't need to go over that again. It says this is the way the new sanctions have been brought in and so on. But let me put this to you. If you were a soldier hiding from Russian drones in eastern Ukraine, do you think you'd appreciate these subtleties, or would you hear this as the United Kingdom basically going easy on Russia and lifting sanctions?
I think there was some confusion around this policy during the week, because what's actually happened is that sanctions have increased, not decreased.
They haven't increased yet. You say they are going to increase, but they have not increased yet.
Because we've announced that there will be an increase in sanctions, and as the Prime Minister said, there's always a transition period from A to B.
You haven't given us a date for when those sanctions will come in. At the moment, in the order that we've seen, it's indefinite. So right now, sanctions are effectively eased. Russian oil is being brought into British ports. What's the date when that's going to stop?
So I don't know the precise date, you have to forgive me, but it is normal, as the Prime Minister said, to transition from A to B.
Next
there will
month,
be an increase in
next month, 6 months, a year, what?
As I said, I don't know the dates, and so you could...
So this could go on... This easing on the way to tougher sanctions could go on for a year, could go on for 2 years.
I'm not sure that's the intention of the government, but we have to be clear about what the new sanctions package is about. The new sanctions package is saying that where Russian oil is sent to a third country for refining and then comes into the UK. Under the previous regime, that was allowed. Under the new regime, it won't be. Therefore, it is tougher sanctions on Russian oil. You can't get through the back door coming into the UK.
Everybody understands that, but you haven't put a date on the current situation, which does mean that Russian crude can go to India and then get imported here.
Which has been the case for some time, which is why we're changing the regime.
Yeah, I know. But the point is, you've been saying for months and months and months, going to stop doing this.
That's why we've announced the change is coming.
And you have announced that there will be a change, but you haven't told us whether that change will come into effect next month or in the autumn or next year. Do you understand then why that Ukrainian soldier might be saying, I don't care what they're saying, what the legalistics are, they are giving money to Russia?
No, because we're increasing the sanctions. If we hadn't announced...
Eventually.
If we hadn't announced to Parliament last week that the government had taken the decision to change, then I would accept the premise of your question. But we have announced that the sanctions will change. We've specified how they will change, and it tightens the grip on the flow of Russian oil flowing through third countries.
It's hard to escape the conclusion. I know what you say your intention is. It's hard to escape the conclusion that the real reason you're doing this is that you're worried that we're going to run out of jet fuel this summer. And this is really about people's holidays.
No, that's totally wrong, totally wrong. One of my jobs in the Cabinet Office is to chair contingency planning, and I've been spending many hours doing that in relation to the impact of the Middle East on the UK. Our jet fuel supplies, you're right, are one of the most critical supplies where we don't produce enough domestically in the UK, but we have other sources from around the world, including from the United States, where they've increased production to be able to meet our needs. To suggest that sanction decisions in relation to Russia have anything to do with jet fuel supplies is just wrong.
All right, we've been talking about the cost of living this week. Chancellor's made an offer of free bus tickets for children, and then there's money off VAT in amusement parks. Well, look, I've taken a look at this. Children in London and Scotland already get free bus travel all the year round. I looked at the entry passes to Thorpe Park, Alton Towers, Legoland, Chessington. They all come in around about 32 quid if you book online, which means that the saving you're offering is £1.64 for the average family with 2 children. A family's got to pay 128 quid just to get into the park. Then they've got to pay travel and all the rest of it. Free travel on buses for some kids and £1.64 off a bill that most families will see as £200, £250. It's not very impressive, is it? It's not going to make much difference.
Trevor, I wouldn't say that just because kids in London get free bus travel, we shouldn't worry about kids anywhere else in the country. I mean, it's right that
I'm just saying
you've belittled it, and I'm just saying...
It's all a bit of flag-waving, isn't it? It's not really going to have an impact on anybody's
We shouldn't just be thinking about kids here in London. There are kids across the country.
I know what you're trying to do, but the point is I've put all the different things that you've put forward together.
I'll happily take them all in turn, but you've told me that bus fare is free for kids in London, so why bother doing it for everybody else? It's a ridiculous question.
That. You know I didn't say that.
There are many kids across the country.
I'm just saying it's not going to make much difference to most people.
It will make a big difference to kids outside of London who currently don't get free travel. We shouldn't be belittling that. This can make a big difference. There are many kids in my constituency who would never travel into the city centre in Bristol because they can't afford to do so. The fact that they can now get free travel is something that we should be celebrating and welcoming. And look, the announcements the Chancellor announced for the Great British Summer of Savings are small, helpful contributions to just help lift the pressure a bit for families during the summer months.
£1.64 off a bill of nearly £200. Is that...
Trevor, I don't think you understand. There are many families who can't afford to take their kids out for a meal or to a theme park.
A family who can't afford to take their kids out for a meal are not going to spend £200 going to a theme park. Look, the point is, you're trumpeting this, but it's really a tiny gesture.
It's not just theme parks, Trevor. You know that. It's a VAT cut on lots of different activities over the summer. When families, when they've got their kids at home out of school, want to try to do something to give them a bit of joy in the days when they're at home, I think we should be welcoming in the fact that the government is taking decisions to help with people's bills on those types of issues over the summer, which can often be a very stressful time for families when they can't afford to get the kids out of the house and to help them do something fun over the summer. But this is not just an isolated package. If you look at our childcare bills support, that's £8,000 a year per child for families who have got young kids in nursery. If you look at the cut we've made to energy bills, if you look at the freezes on NHS prescriptions, the bus fare cap at £3 for adults, this is part of a much wider package of actions from the government, which are trying to help with the cost of living.
You say it's part of a wider package, and in a sense, that's actually the point I'm making here. This is, in some ways, emblematic of what some people call Starmerism, that you have a big problem and you produce tiny solutions. Prime Ministers today writing to broadcasters, calling on them to make the Champions League final free to air, save some people a fiver off going to see it in the pub or wherever it is. At the same time, this morning, Reform, who you regard as your principal opposition, are proposing tax cuts worth thousands for workers who do overtime. You can criticise that, but the point is, the scale of their ambition, 1,000, and yours is a fiver. Do you feel you're fiddling while Britain is burning?
No. Well, look, there's one part of your question I might agree with, which I'll come back to when I've just answered the first part. The first part is when you're the Reform Party, you can create fiction as much as you like. I could offer you, if I was in Reform, to save you £500 a year on your tax. But how am I going to pay for the NHS cuts to its budget as a consequence? No, this is important. If Reform says they're going to cut tax, it means they're going to cut funding to the NHS. Are you happy with that? Because their proposal is they're going to charge you to use the NHS.
No, they're going to have the welfare reforms that you didn't bring in.
No.
That's what they say.
No, they've said they're going to have a paid-for insurance product for accessing NHS services. So you might get a cut in your taxes from Reform, but you're also going to have to start paying for the NHS. That is not a credible proposal. So the bit of your question I agree with, Is there a bigger challenge we're facing in the country where we need to be richer in this country, where more people get to share the benefits of that? Absolutely. But if any politician tells you there's an easy answer to that question, they're lying to you.
Darren Jones, thank you for your time this morning. Well, let's see what our panel made of all that. We're joined all morning by the political commentator and Reform UK supporter, Tim Montgomery, the former advisor to Boris Johnson, Joe Tanner, and the former Labour advisor, John McTernan. Let's start with the great summer British, basically, theme park thing.
Exciting, isn't it? So exciting. Rolls off the tongue.
Am I being over-sceptical, Joe, about the impact of this?
No, I think you're being very appropriately sceptical. I think you made the point about big challenge and tiny solution, and I think this is ultimately, this does feel like tinkering at the edges, and I'm not convinced it's the right answer at all, because there are plenty of things that families can do for free. I think the bus travel issue is something that, you know, I live in London, that is something that my son's always had, and I think that is a very useful and very helpful thing that he has been able to have. But the idea that you're going to get, you know, a few quid, barely that, I think, in terms of the saving that you quoted off of a family going to an attraction, just doesn't feel... It feels like they're spending money that actually, by the autumn, they're going to regret having spent on this. And it feels like it was a desperate sort of desire to do something during the summer. But actually, when you're looking at energy bills going up and all the other cost of living issues that are not getting any easier, I think this could then be a huge problem that they've spent the money over the summer.
They're trying to look as though they're doing something. They know that the cost of living continues to bite. It's the #1 issue for voters. But the reality is, and you were teasing him, trying to get him to spend more money, Trevor.
No,
I
was speaking for England, Tim. I was speaking for England.
We've had so many crises since the stock market crash, whether it's Ukraine or COVID. The government spent once-in-a-generation sums of money to help us in those difficult times again and again. There is no money left. That is the reality, and we don't have a government that's willing to tell us that. They rather sort of dress up these penny-sized solutions and pretend they're pound-sized, but we can't afford to do the kind of intervention that we did in COVID and we did in the Ukraine crisis. We are a broke country that is living beyond our means.
John.
Well, I'm going to be very amused to hear what Robert Jenrick says about how he's going to fund the tax cuts on overtime. These massive tax cuts that Trevor was asking Darren about.
Welfare reform, as Trevor said.
Yes, but you splash the cash. If we've got no money left, you can't spend it on tax.
Well, we have no money left because you
will get an answer from Robert Jenrick. We'll come to that in a minute.
I'm sure I won't get an answer from Robert Jenrick, because I won't
get an answer, but whether you like it or not is a different issue.
The question will be responded to. Look, in the end, it's a gimmick. In the end, it's an attempt to demonstrate, as everything has been this week and previous weeks, the government's still on the road. And why is the government trying desperate to show us on the road? It's because it's on the ropes. That's basically it. And the branding and the smallness and everything, the buses, I think that was a huge change in London when buses became free for young people. I think it's a great thing. I think the museums and galleries are free, they should stay free. I'm much more in favour of people spending more time with their kids in what local authority provided, or national museums, which are free, rather than I'm going to give you something.
And quite frankly, there's an educational value. If you actually think about the doing something, when you're giving something away, when you're using taxpayers' money to help people, what is the ultimate benefit? Now, actually, things like being able to get the bus to go to a free museum or gallery where you're going to learn something, there's an experience. That is great, and you can understand the value of that more generally. I'm not saying people shouldn't have fun, but this does feel like... But it feels somewhere between, you know, the Eat Out to Help Out that Rishi did? There's almost a sort of, you know, go and ride out to help Starmer stay in or something. There's a really weird kind of sort of almost... It feels like there's something they're trying to look back and say, what did we do that gave people some sort of feel-good factor? Will they feel happier about me or my government? Because
you're all, to some greater or less extent, communications professionals. And hearing this morning, I'm wondering, actually, if there's a problem that the government isn't quite seeing, that all of these things it comes up with, good instinct, you know, let's try and do something crunchy for people, but they simply get it just a little bit wrong. I mean, I think you could probably say that about the free Champions League thing, where I think most people are going to say, look, if I want to watch football for a fiver, I mean, honestly, that's what the Prime Minister's concerning
But these
himself
are all
with.
extra choices, aren't they? These are all extra choices. These are things you would choose to do. It doesn't actually deal with the cost of living crisis, as in your general costs that you have all the time.
Again, the Champions League thing is ridiculous. People love the fact that the best football players in the world play in the Premiership. They play for us because of the TV rights. Because the TV rights have been so well developed by Sky and also so well developed by the Premier League, we have so much money in our football. It's what great quality it is. And then to say, I'd like to pull away one bit of this structure, I just think everything is on the surface and nothing is structural or fundamental.
Tim?
Look, there are some fundamental problems in this country. Our climate change policies mean we've lost much of our manufacturing industry. Our welfare policies mean that there's so many people who go out every day knowing that the person who stays at home in the house next to them is often better off. These are some of the fundamental problems in Britain. Labour isn't addressing them, can't address them. So to distract us, they say that anyone who complains about those underlying challenges are racist or stupid, or they do things like these schemes. They do these schemes so that we don't focus on what is the underlying problem. Big welfare state, ridiculous climate change
this is a reform case. We'll hear that from Robert Jenrick in a minute.
You make an interesting point.
True.
You said about net zero and manufacturing, but it's not just net zero. It's actually an inability of the government to do anything. For a year, there's been when is there going to be a package around the price that businesses pay for their energy? When are they going to do that? They've been talking about it. They said they were going to do it last year. They haven't done it. So the problem is we are seeing businesses, manufacturers in particular, you're right. Yeah. We're seeing the jobs, what they do, that stuff is going abroad and will not come back again. So it's inaction as well is this huge problem.
It's not just climate change, but we have the highest energy prices in the world.
OK, I'm going to come back in just a second. I want to talk about this issue of whether Starmerism meets the challenge of the moment. But before we do that, let's hear from Reform. I've been speaking to the party's Treasury spokesperson, Robert Jenrick. Robert Jenrick, what do you make of the announcement by President Trump this morning that there might be a deal with Iran?
Well, potentially very good news. The Reform, we want this war to come to an end. We are not in favour of the UK or indeed anyone else getting embroiled in foreign wars. And we're very concerned about the massive impact this is having on people here, on their energy bills, for domestic consumers and also for businesses. So the sooner this war comes to an end, the better for everyone's sake.
OK, thank you. Now, you've announced this morning that you have a new policy, which is essentially a tax break for workers doing overtime. How are you going to make this work? This is going to be a bit complicated, isn't it? I mean, what is overtime and who gets it and so on? Some people don't do overtime.
No, it's actually very simple, Trevor. Reform is for workers, and we want to reward the hardest working people who are going out every day, doing a 40-hour week, and then choosing to go above and beyond in order to pay the bills or to save up for a deposit or just to take the kids out for a meal at the end of the week or to go on a holiday or buy Christmas presents at the end of the year. And these people are finding life very, very tough at the moment. So under a Reform government, if you go to your boss, you take on extra hours, you do that overtime, you won't pay any income tax at all, zero. It's a hard work bonus. It's going to increase the earnings of millions of households across the country. It will be a big change, but it's one that I think will be welcome by so many people who are working very hard at the moment.
It sounds absolutely lovely, but if I were an employer, first thing I'd say is, yay. That means what I can do now is pay the first 40 hours at minimum wage, and then I can pay the overtime at some exorbitant rate, and everybody wins except the taxman.
Well, I don't expect that's the way it's going to work, and there'll obviously be anti-avoidance.
Well, why wouldn't it be? It benefits everybody, except the public finances.
Well, we don't think that's what's going to happen. There will be anti-avoidance measures in place. But our priority is making sure that working people get the incentive to take on those extra hours. you're going to have to work a 40-hour week, and that will obviously be paid at the normal rate. But if you do choose to take on the extra hours, then you're going to get rewarded for it, and that's the right thing to do. I mean, let me give you some examples. If you worked in the Heinz factory in Wigan and you chose to stay after work for another hour or hour and a half, do 7 hours extra a week, you're going to take home £1,000 extra a year. If you're a newly qualified nurse and you did an extra hour every day, 5 hours a week, you're going to take home almost £1,300 at the end of the year. This is real money for the hardest working people out there. Yes, it does cost money. It's going to cost about £5 billion. We're going to find that through savings in welfare. We've already announced £40 billion in savings. No more welfare for migrants. No more welfare for people who are choosing not to be in work. But I think this sends the very strongest signal that reform is for working people, and we're going to back people who are choosing to do the extra hours.
I don't suppose it's completely an accident that you mentioned Wigan as an example, but let's not go into that because we have a by-election. We have by-election rules. But I still don't quite see how you are going to prevent employers from gaming the system and reducing the tax burden on both them and their employees without massive intrusions into every company, every hairdresser, every garage in the country.
Well, we've allocated £5 billion to this, and that includes an apportionment for some reclassification of unpaid overtime to paid overtime. So we expect there will be some changes within the labour market. But if there is gaming of this, if there's abuse, then obviously we'll clamp down on that, and we'll work with HMRC and the Treasury when we enter government to make sure that we get that right. But the rules are very simple. You have to have worked your normal contracted 40 hours, and then you're choosing to take on some extra hours. And, for those extra hours, you're going to get this big tax.
I talked to Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister's Office, about your proposal this morning. And he says, number one, people are going to cheat. Number two, it's going to cost you £5 billion, and that tells you what reform's going to do. You're going to take it out of the National Health Service because you're going to introduce an insurance system and basically destroy the NHS.
Well, it does tell you what reform's going to do, yeah. And who is reform in business for? It's for working people. We're for the 90% of people.
No, but you're going to get the £5 billion, and it won't be going to the NHS that needs it, is his point.
It's going to working people. Look, we are not for benefit street.
And that is, you're not saying we're not going to cut the NHS.
Of course we're not going to cut the NHS, but I'm not accepting the premise of the nonsense that Darren Jones has been spouting on your show. We're for working people. We're unashamedly giving a tax cut to the hardest working people out there. What's Labour going to do? They're going to increase taxes, as they have done throughout their time in government, and waste it on benefits.
OK.
We're not for the benefit street, neither are we for the luxury beliefs brigade that Labour and the Tory party are fighting over at the top end either. We're for the 90% of people who are in the middle, are working hard, exactly the sort of people who take on overtime because they want to do the right thing for themselves and their family. Those people should know that if there's a reform government, they're our first priority, and we're going to do everything we can to cut tax for them.
Well, look, in the midst of all this lovely centrism that you're giving me, we hear a lot of blood and thunder from your colleague Zia Youssef about immigration and deportations and so on. We'll come to the specifics of that at the moment. But can I just ask you, first of all, we heard this week that net migration is down to 171,000, lowest for 5-6 years. Has Shabana Mahmood shot your fox?
No, these numbers are still very high. Look, I welcome the fact it's coming down, absolutely. Ultimately, I had a huge battle in government to secure the changes that are primarily responsible for doing this. Ultimately,
yeah, you were Minister for Immigration.
Ultimately,
you walked off the park before.
Well, no, I secured the very changes that are making this, announced them, and then resigned because they weren't enough. I want the numbers to come down much more. At Reform, we don't want hundreds of thousands of people coming into the country. We want net emigration. That means more people leaving every year than are coming in. Why? So that we can reduce pressure on housing, on people getting a doctor or a dentist, and stop this constant pressure where British workers' wages are being hammered because there's an easy lever of foreign labour. So it's got to keep coming down. Reform have a very clear policy, net emigration. We're going to get it right down and have a long period, maybe a decade or more, in which we give the country breathing space. And I just say one other thing, Trevor. The other thing that was very striking in the stats that came out was that there was now a massive problem with emigration of bright young people. These are young professionals, successful people choosing to leave the country in their hundreds of thousands. This is a new phenomenon.
Well,
call it what you like, the Reeves wave, the Starmer exodus, I've seen people calling it. These are people leaving the country because they don't think there's any hope. And that is what reform's going to change.
I think that
things like our tax policy today is going to give those people hope that if they work hard in Britain, then that enterprise, that hard work, is going to be rewarded.
I think there is an argument about the actual numbers there. It's not hundreds of thousands of young people, but let's not get into that, because I want to ask you about a broader question. OK, you say what you say about immigration, but really, are you going to be able to get it down to those numbers without some extra measures? I wonder if the problem for reform is that you're going to need to go a bit further than you have suggested up until now. Maybe you need to go further, as proposed by your former colleagues in Restore. Here's what they want. Let me show you what they're saying. They're saying that if a legally resident foreign national, and by the way, legally resident is quite important here, foreign national, if they can't do any of these things, speak English, they live in social housing, out they go. Are you attracted to any of these policies?
Well, most of those are reform policy, have been reform policy long before this party ever existed.
Is it actually reform policy to deport someone who is legally resident but lives in social housing?
Well, what we're saying, in some cases, because what we're saying is that we're going to abolish ILR and make a much longer path to British citizenship. And so instead of having this baked-in guarantee to remain in our country...
Current government's going to do that.
It's not abolishing ILR. It's making a somewhat longer path to British citizenship. Under our policy, you'll have to keep applying. If you've got a job, if you meet the criteria, then you can stay in the country and you can work your way to being a British citizen. But let me just finish this.
Hang on, before you go, just to be clear...
Then you will have to leave.
Are you saying to me that a foreign person who is legally resident but lives in social housing will be deported under a reform government just because of that? They live in social housing.
Well, not exclusively because of that.
Well, that's what... But if you just said that's what you agreed with.
If they fail to meet our criteria because they're not in work or they're not working in as many hours, not earning enough money, then they won't be able to renew their work visa because ILR won't exist and they'll be asked to leave.
Oh, so you don't agree with that?
That is fair.
You don't agree with all of Restore's policies?
Let me finish on the point about social housing. Under a reform government, let me be very clear about this, social housing will be purely for British citizens. So you will never be able to access social housing unless you're a Brit. And I think that is just fair. Why are the hard-working British people out there who can't get their kids and their grandkids onto the housing ladder, and then they see people who are new arrivals to our country getting it? And, I think it's disgraceful, frankly.
Zia Yusuf wants to deport more than 1 million illegal immigrants. That's the number he says. The cost of each enforced return at the moment is about £49,000, which means that the cost of your deportation programme would work out at £50 billion,
no.
10 billion a year. Straightforward arithmetic, the cost...
Well, no.
It's ONS numbers,
let me finish
49,000 apiece. Are you going to stump up 10 billion each year for sending people back home?
Well, firstly, we will finance a programme to set up a new body that will get people out of the country.
And you're going to give it 10 billion a year?
It's going to have a big budget, but it's not going to be of that kind, because the big drivers of cost today are the fact that there's a merry-go-round of legal claims. So it takes forever to get people out of the country. Reform is going to leave the ECHR...
it isn't. It's flights, it's security. That's what it is.
The cost of a flight is not all of that money. A lot of it is the fact that deportations are constantly delayed. I've been in an immigration removal centre where minutes before somebody is being put on the bus to the airport, they suddenly claim that they were a slave or that they've got some new claim that they'd never raised before. Enough. Reform is going to cut through all of that. That will save tens of thousands of pounds in every case. And look, I also think the climate in the country will change. It will become apparent to everyone that you can't get away with this scam any longer, and many people will choose to leave voluntarily.
Robert Jenrick, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Well, back to our panel, Tim, Joe and John. John, we can pick over the details of this tax proposal, but actually, politically, it feels quite clever, doesn't it?
it feels like an uncosted promise.
Yeah.
Because that's what it is. And so you can't just appear and try and be a responsible politician and say, I'm going to have a £5 billion programme and I'll find the money somewhere. £5 billion reduction in the tax coming in is going to be a major problem for public services. That's the basic thing. Darren Jones wasn't wrong. You either cut the NHS or you charge for it. You don't have a limitless amount of money. The tax revenue coming in has to be replaced with something else or a cut. And I couldn't understand, apart from a wavy, what the point of the argument was. And it goes back to, you nailed Robert Jenrick on their plans to deport 2 million people. The Financial Times did a calculation, put it to Zia Youssef, and he said 2 million people are about the right number of people we want to deport. They want to detain and deport 2 million people. That is 100 billion. They've got no way of financing that, and it's also un-British. People have the right to be in the country, the right to live in social housing, but they'll be deported because, even though they're legally resident. And it's like, imagine an American politician coming on and saying, we're going to abolish the green card. That's what he's saying. He's abolishing the British green card.
To be fair, John, they wouldn't be the first government to come into power with promising to do something based on cuts that they are promising and they couldn't deliver. I think we're seeing that.
I mean, that's what's always happened. I mean, back in the day that I was working with Boris Johnson on a mayoral campaign, it was all about we were going to do things because we were going to get efficiencies in, the Metropolitan Police and other things like
efficiencies.
we do. These things happen all the time. But I think you have to hand it to reform. I think this is an incredibly smart policy. It's going to appeal to a broad base. Actually, it's clearly there's a connection to the by-election coming up, but also, I think more generally, it is, to our point about what we're saying, that one of the criticisms of this government, it's very targeted support. The interesting thing, though, and maybe I'm wrong, but I do think you were really pressing on a bruise about the potential for businesses and what businesses might do. HMRC staff are probably going to be the ones that are going to make the most out of this because they'll all be working overtime trying to make sure that there is not dodge. So actually, if you're working in HMRC and this policy comes in, you're probably going to be the ones that will definitely see the benefits.
That might be true, but I take John's point about we have to make sure everything is carefully funded. But what British people definitely hear is when Labour ever has a priority, it's the public sector. Funded by the public sector unions, Labour always choose the public sector now as their priority. And people don't think that they're getting value for money from their taxes. Many people out there, every pound they earn, they carefully budget for, and they don't see the same carefulness from government. And what we are communicating is that they, who've been at the back of the queue for a long time, will be our priority. Well, and that has to be right.
We can see what the slogan is here, Tim, but is it... for a party that says it wants to break with conventional politics and be honest with people and all of that stuff, is it right to offer something that, in practice, you can't quite yet define how you're going to do it? And taking Joe's point, I don't think Robert Jenrick really answered how he would be able to prevent people gaming the system and depriving HMRC of revenue without massive intrusions by the taxman in
the general election. This is not the time for detailed policies. That time will come, and your questions...
Now's the time for fantasy policy.
And your questions will be relevant. What I think we're suggesting at the moment is our priorities. And our priorities are not more money into public sector that doesn't spend money well. It's to help people with a cost of living crisis. That is the number one issue in almost every household in the country.
Capturing people's imagination. I totally agree about the questions that need to be asked about how it will work and how it will be financed. Yeah. And, Tim, you're right. When there is a general election, that is exactly what will happen. And there is a risk that, they're putting something forward that they can't quite explain. There are some holes in it. But will people get excited about it? Will it affect the by-election result? That's absolutely true. But also, let's face it, we have been void of some interesting ideas
100%,
and some clever stuff. And actually, I think
John,
it's sparking a debate.
This is vibes politics at its best, and the vibe they're spinning here is we are the workers' party.
Yeah, but they're not addressing the reality of British workers who work 37.5 hours a week, not 40 hours a week, so they'll all be out of it. They're not addressing the reality of women's work, which is part-time, so all part-time workers are excluded from this. They're not addressing the reality of the 7 million people in the labour force who are self-employed. They're out of this too. This is not aimed, this is aimed at as ever, it's aimed at a past non-existent working class.
Well,
who work in these mythical factories. This is a policy thrown out in a by-election campaign. That's why Robert Jenrick mentioned Wigan. That's why Tim's going up to Makerfield this week. I'll be going up next week as well. The thing is, does this change anything for today's workers? The thing I'd do for today's workers is I'd bring back the closed shop. That raises wages by 10% immediately.
Oh, boy.
Whoa.
On that bombshell, let's go to the break, after which we'll be joined by the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Priti Patel.
I urge you not to look away. If Hamas hands the hostages over, they will end this conflict. The world has been watching.
Good to see you again. How are you?
Did she say how he was?
The conditions are awful.
The jets were ordered to come back.
Historic day here today. How will you respond if India does launch airstrikes?
They'll be all out to war.
I'm just going to put some body armor on.
I'm Yalda Hakim.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist... Hi, darling.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
...is being a Sky News journalist. You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more. Well, let's kick off and make a statement. What can our Prime Minister say to you to not impose tariffs? He's coming out! What more do you need?
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We're in an area that's just been reclaimed.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News. People are directly protesting.
The whole neighborhood is rallied around her.
It's been impenetrable to journalists over the last 2 years of war in Sudan.
I've been waiting for this for 2 years. It doesn't feel like a big homecoming.
It was never going to be pretty. War isn't pretty.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
Perfect.
Let's bring you some breaking news. Being a Sky News presenter. I began by asking,
Thank you so much.
trusting us to tell her story. The battle for number 10. Sky News has been given exclusive access. Let me give you a sneak peek. It was the day those present would never forget. Why did you decide to open up and tell your story?
It's day 85 of the Iran war, but could there be an end in sight? President Trump says a deal between the United States and Iran will be announced soon, with reports that it would include the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz in exchange for a lifting of the blockade on Iranian ports. Well, joining me now is the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Priti Patel. Good afternoon, where you are, I guess.
Good morning to you, Trevor.
What do you make of this proposed agreement or deal or framework, whatever it's going to be called?
First of all, I mean, the news has just been coming in recent hours, but first and foremost, it's early days. We all want a ceasefire. We all want this war to end, and we need the right kind of outcome and resolution. The reality is we've heard all sorts of things, potentially about a 60-day ceasefire, that this could be phased over the first 30 days and the second 30 days in terms of what there is to negotiate. There are many, many questions to ask, really, about the details. We need to see what those details are. I think really front and centre of the minds of people here, where I am in the region, is safety and security. We want this war to end, but also the issue about the Straits of Hormuz. You know, the Iranians are basically holding hostage the Straits, and this is an economic artery for the world. They've threatened tolls. The Straits have been mined as well. There are all sorts of issues here. Now, we've also heard that in this so-called deal, the Iranians would be responsible for demining the Straits. Well, quite frankly, I don't think we can trust the Iranians to do anything. And, you know, there'll be a role certainly for Britain there with demining equipment and the mine hunters, but also other countries to step up. So, Trevor, I think, you know, we're in the first few hours of briefing and news reports dropping and President Trump's tweets on this. We need to genuinely see the full details and the full facts and really go from there. But, you know, we all want to see this end. This has just been painful for everyone, and it's had catastrophic economic consequences across the globe.
Thank you so much for that. Let's move on to some domestic issues. I'd like to just talk about immigration to you. This has been one of your pieces of territory when you were Home Secretary for, 3 years? Net migration is down to 171,000 last year, we've learned. You brought in a system which gave us net migration of over 900,000 people in this so-called Boris wave. Have you sent Shabana Mahmood a congratulatory message for doing what you promised to do but never achieved?
First of all, of course, these measures are to be welcome, and they started under the last Conservative government. I'm sure, Trevor, you and many others will acknowledge that in terms of visa restrictions. What has gone on in the past, you know, decisions are made for various reasons at the time. And now, of course, we've got to move on, but there's important detail here, I think, in these figures. First and foremost, the issue of illegal migration is still not being gripped at all by this government. I think those figures have shown that since Keir Starmer became Prime Minister, we still have 72,000 people illegally crossing the Channel. Asylum applications haven't budged or changed. They're still at over 80,000. And with that, of course, you know, we're now seeing Brits leave the country. So there are a range of issues here within the migration system that need addressing. Fundamentally, you know my views on illegal migration. I brought in measures, the National Anti-Borders Act, which basically made it inadmissible for people that came to our country illegally through boat crossings. Bear in mind, there are legal routes to come to our country. People that came to our country illegally, they should not automatically be given the right to claim asylum. These are really big issues that need to be addressed. You know where the Conservative Party stands on this in terms of leaving the ECH, making sure that those that come to our country illegally are not automatically admissible to claiming asylum, and ensuring that we apply the regimes, they're all in the statute book, by the way, of visa sanctions, and also removing people and reforming the immigration courts and tribunals, which basically has become a circus. Those measures have to be implemented.
Yes, well, I did put to Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary of the Prime Minister, that actually this result on migration numbers was essentially the result of measures introduced by the Conservatives. But I suppose what he would say, didn't quite say it this morning, but what he could say was that you introduced these measures to solve a problem that you created in the first place by by changing the rules to allow more people to turn up.
First and foremost, the system we're now proposing should be changed in a different way, in a fundamentally different way. But the system back then was certainly Britain post-Brexit, points-based system, based on visas, people coming to work to come into the country legally to work. That's one aspect, and of course the other aspect is illegal migration. Clearly the system isn't working, Trevor. I think everyone can acknowledge that.
But it's a system you created.
Well, in terms of the numbers coming into the country and also on illegal migration, which no one has really tackled whatsoever, other than the measures that I brought in and the laws. We do have laws on the statute book that can be applied, you know, and I was always imploring for those measures to be applied and brought in. We had deterrent programs as well for third country removals. Why is it that other countries are now using the Rwanda scheme to remove illegal migrants to Rwanda and let them resettle there? But Britain is still not doing this. So fundamentally, Trevor, things have to change now. They really do. The Conservative Party is the only party with a plan on this, and you know the details of this in terms of fixing the broken system now around illegal migration and legal migration, leaving the ECHR, but being much more forthright on those measures to deal with illegal migrants who are coming into our country since Keir Starmer became Prime Minister. 72,000 of them, and they're still claiming asylum, which means you've got asylum hotel issues, you've got asylum backlog cases, you've got all those issues that still are not being reformed.
Let me ask you about an issue that's arisen this week in relation to Ukraine. Do you accept the government's explanation on the Russian oil sanctions, that all they're doing is introducing a fresh set of sanctions, essentially in the delayed fashion that has happened before, and that in the end, these will be tougher sanctions on the Russians?
Well, let me just unpack that. I mean, the immediate response from me is no, for a number of reasons. I think it was on the 15th of October last year, the government, the Labour government, publicly said that they would stop any Russian crude oil coming into our country, being imported into our country from third parties. And we know for a fact who those third parties are. They're India, China, Turkey, who are refining Russian oil. And of course, that is funding Putin's war, that is helping the Russian economy. And when the government say they're introducing new sanctions, they might be introducing them, but there's no framework for that. There's no date coming forward. And in the meantime, they're now allowing and enabling Russian imported oil to come into the United Kingdom. So they've contradicted themselves. And clearly that is not helpful when it comes to the Ukraine conflict at all. And secondly, when it comes to the issues about oil, we have our own remedies in the United Kingdom around energy prices, which is to effectively use our own reserves in the North Sea and to grant licenses to basically open up domestic production. We should not be allowing Russian imported oil to come into the United Kingdom.
Dame Priti Patel, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Now, has the UK damaged its relationship with Ukraine? I'll be joined by the Ukrainian MP, Kira Rudik.
best thing about being a Sky News journalist... My darling.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
Is being a Sky News journalist. You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more. Well, let's kick off and make a statement. What can our Prime Minister say to you to not impose tariffs? He's coming out! What more do you need?
During a hastily arranged phone call this week, Sir Keir Starmer reassured President Zelensky that he hadn't gone soft on Russia, telling him that the UK's support for Ukraine remained steadfast, his word. It came after the UK government was accused of watering down sanctions on Russia, allowing diesel and jet fuel from Russian crude oil to enter the UK if it's refined in other countries. Well, the Tory leader, Kemi Badenoch, called it insane. Well, let's see. With me now is Ukrainian MP Kira Rudik. Good morning.
Good morning, Trevor, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Let's just start with the immediate situation. There was a major attack on Kyiv last night. What do we know about casualties and damage and the situation there?
What we know right now is that it was one of the most devastating attacks since the beginning of full-scale invasion that included at least 50 missiles and 700 drones attacking Kyiv and other cities. We know, as of right now, of 2 people killed and at least 80 wounded. And right now, the emergency services are working, trying to find and rescue people under the rubble. So our prayers are with the families right now and with the emergency workers, whom we wish all the success in the world and ability to find people and rescue the ones who may be there. These casualties include 2 children being wounded and being at the hospital right now. And that was indeed a very devastating night for people. And it's very hard to explain how does it feel when you're sitting under the bombs. But I can tell you from my personal experience, sometimes it's even worse when you are somewhere like in London and you are constantly calling your family, trying to figure out if they are okay. We survived as a country yet another night, and we will continue fighting, that's for sure.
Do you think this is a particular moment? Is this a start of a new wave, or there's some particular reason for this bombardment?
Russia continues on their plan. After the United States announced that they understood that they didn't have any success with the negotiations, Russia continues with what they had in plan all along, attacking Ukraine and hope that we will capitulate, which we do not plan to. We didn't do it in 2022, and we do not plan to capitulate right now. But it also shows that Russia gets more and more desperate in the way that they are attacking us. And again, from the military perspective, what did they achieve this night? Nothing. They didn't get more territories. They did not show the world that they are capable of something. They just commit terrorist attack over and over for the sake of killing people.
We don't know this, by the way, but it has been suggested that they used what is called a hypersonic missile, which is an exceptionally powerful weapon and one which has an element of, if you like, surprise. Nobody can see it coming. Does that suggest an escalation?
Of course, it is an escalation if that would be confirmed. And every single time when Ukraine fights back, our Western partners are afraid of so-called escalation from Russia. But the truth is, no matter what we do, they keep going harder and harder, using all the means and weapons they have in their possession, committing all kinds of the war crimes at the temporarily occupied territories. So the only answer to whatever Russia is doing is to work more closely together, to get more air defense systems, and to fight back, to pressure Russia into stopping. Like, after what you have just seen from last night, do you think that this is actions of a country that really wants peace? But that was the United States narrative for a year right now, that Putin is ready for peace. No, he is not. He was never ready for peace. When somebody starts a war, it is very easy to say if they want peace, because then they would stop. And Russia does not stop. The only way they stop is when they are punched back. And this is what we are able to do with with different level of success.
Well, of course, you mentioned the importance of partners, the United States, Europe, and of course the United Kingdom. What was the reaction in Kyiv or in Ukraine as a whole to the announcement of what our government describes as a fresh set of sanctions?
At first, it was a surprise, because the United Kingdom is one of the countries that first has been our strongest partner, but also a country where all the parties are supportive of Ukraine on different levels, but mainly all Ukrainian flag is still waving above number 10. And people on the streets are saying, we are standing with Ukraine, we are supportive. So to hear that there was this like a moment of weakness, a point of weakness, was surprising. And I believe this is what was discussed between President and Prime Minister. We did not hear the results, but let me tell you this. No matter what happened, Russia is always laughing that Europe is paying for the war from both pockets. From one, supporting Ukraine, and from another one, paying for Russian gas and oil. Is it worthy of continuing doing that? Because it's definitely worthy of supporting Ukraine. And we really hope that all our partners, all European countries, will every day go away from purchasing Russian gas and oil, rather than trying to move back a little bit.
Well, our government says that what they're doing is just the beginning of a fresh set of sanctions, which will be tougher. I'm guessing from what you said, it doesn't quite feel like that in Ukraine.
Let me give you this example. Just 3 months ago, Russia's economy was on the brink of collapse, and everybody was saying that. And then President Trump gave them a hand, a lifeline, when he lifted sanctions and allowed them to make $10 billion a month to continue supporting the war. Even if you are getting them a chunk of that, it's not worth it. It's not worth it because they will not use it for the sake of their people. They will just buy more missiles and drones, and the attacks on Kyiv and Ukraine will continue.
Can you envisage a situation in which there are negotiations anytime soon?
We are ready for negotiations and we are ready for a ceasefire, but they need to happen in good faith. What you have seen, does it sound or seem as a good faith? Russia is not ready for the end of the war. They would have acted differently if they were. And if there is no way of making sure that they wouldn't attack us again, because we are absolutely sure that they have it in plan, then all the negotiations will end same way as the US brokered ones, with absolutely nothing.
So it's victory or nothing?
It's figuring out a way of how do we make sure our children wouldn't have to fight this war. And it can have many shapes or forms. But the goal is this.
Kira Rudik, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, and glory to Ukraine.
Okay. In just a moment, we'll hear once again from our panel.
This is how you travel when the mafia wants to kill you.
He's almost given up his own freedom, but that's the price he's willing to pay.
Here, they don't just arrest and Ndrangheta mafia members, they also live among them.
Time after time, I've seen the devastating impact of extreme weather and climate change.
We don't have much snow at the moment.
They've had a warm spring and exceptionally hot summer, and that means they're expecting to lose more than 3 times the amount of ice than they usually do.
Flames are still forcing people from their homes and leaving many questioning their futures.
Here was my life. We have nothing. I can't say anything, it's so sad.
This disaster is testing the resolve of everyone on this island.
The only way out now is by boat.
Everything you see is devastated, and the misery being felt by people living here is repeated in towns and villages across Central Europe.
Sky News, Get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead. The loss is profound.
Whole families died in this collapse, generations wiped out.
The violence has penetrated the heart of the city rather than being contained to the estates around the edge, and that speaks to the level of anger being felt here. In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash. This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
This is an example of an advert, really. Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
Fire, shouts the commander. There's a dash to safety.
We've now got to wait inside the shelter to see if there is incoming.
I'm Deborah Hames, Sky security and defence editor.
Should Russia's war with Ukraine escalate significantly, pilots like these could be called upon to go into combat for real.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We're in an area that's just been reclaimed. Mr. Zuma, Sky News. People are directly protesting.
The whole neighborhood is rallied around her.
It's been impenetrable to journalists over the last 2 years of war in Sudan.
I've been waiting for this for 2 years. It doesn't feel like a big homecoming. It was never going to be pretty. War isn't pretty.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
Perfect.
Let's bring you some breaking news. Being a Sky News presenter. I began by asking,
Thank you so much.
trusting us to tell her story. The battle for number 10. Sky News has been given exclusive access. Let me give you a sneak peek. It was the day those present would never forget. Why did you decide to open up and tell your story?
Well, let's bring our panel back in. With me are Tim Montgomery, Joe Tanner and John McTernan. Tim, reform tends to benefit when immigration is a big salient issue people are thinking about and so on. Has the fall we've seen this week to 171,000 started to take it off the table?
Well, I remember when David Cameron promised to bring immigration down to the tens of thousands. That was the aim then, and we're still way above that number. So, yes, it's welcome that the numbers are down. The numbers hide the fact that last week we learned from the Sunday Times Rich List that some of our most creative people, the people who create jobs, pay taxes, they are leaving this country in unprecedented numbers. So there's bad sides to what we're learning as well. But the problem isn't so much the flow, still need to address that, it's the stock. We have a lot of people who've come in recent years who, frankly, haven't integrated. We used to be an integration superpower in Britain. People of all sort of skin colours rose to the top of society and we made immigration work. But we have to accept there is a relationship between the amount of people who come in every year and our ability to absorb those people into the mainstream of British life. And that is still the challenge. And I think we probably need a good decade of low immigration to ensure full integration of those who've come into our country.
That's not actually Robert Jenrick's policy.
Pardon?
Robert Jenrick on this very programme said net migration is the target, actually reducing, and then he said, oh, but we've got to, in some way, shackle bright young people, make them stay here.
No, he didn't say that.
He did. He said...
That's your words.
No, he said net migration. He said, we must have net emigration from this country. That must be
He didn't say shackle.
And then he said, but we mustn't let our young people go, our bright young people, which is an absurd idea. This kind of government-controlled population number.
No, he just wants to encourage them here.
Let's go to the core of it. Let's go to the core of this proposition that people aren't integrating. What is it about Polish people, white Catholics, that makes them not integrate in the UK, one of the largest new communities? What is it about Indian, Pakistani and Bangladeshi populations who've been here since the late 50s? What is it about, and they're the other three big groups, and the other one, Nigerians, English-speaking, church-going, qualification-seeking, hard-working middle-class people. All of those they're the large groups that have moved, and they've mainly moved to London and the South East, and they've mainly moved into the new housing that's developed around London. They've moved into Slough, they've moved into Milton Keynes, they've moved into...
Do you want me to answer?
So the issue, London's not that worried about immigration, because the immigration powers our economy in London and the South East. The issue is how you get growth in other areas, and there are models, like in Manchester, there are models about how you can get growth.
Well,
can I respond to some of that?
Can I just deal with that point? I mean, in the way the point that Tim made. My colleague Tom Cheshire pointed out the other day that in 2004, the foreign-born population in this country is 6 million. Today, it's about 12 million. Translated into real world, that means that, you know, you get on a bus somewhere, you are now twice as likely to be sitting next to somebody who's foreign-born. And to take John's point, actually, in the recent times, that person, the possibility of that person being visibly, you know, not white is, it has increased because the big flow has been from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and West Africa, from Nigeria. Are we often tilting at the wrong issue here, thinking about the border rather than the point that Tim made about integration? In fact, both of you have made about integration. What do you think, Jo?
I don't even know if it's integration. I think the issue is that public services and the system has not been able to deal with the numbers. And so people have made the connection that more people has meant that the country is worse off. The things that you need to access, we're worse off. We can't get on the housing ladder. We can't get social housing. We can't see a GP. And I think actually it's for me, and maybe I'm less educated on this. Maybe I take a simplistic view, but it feels as though successive governments were allowing people to come in, but then didn't have the forethought, the resources, the planning to actually create the services and the infrastructure that you need to support those people. And that imbalance is where we have this huge debate, because it's then about how people feel about their communities, how they feel about the things that they pay their taxes to fund, and they feel that there is a huge imbalance, and they see that imbalance as being in favour of people that were not born here and that came in here. And I don't think that's about being racist. I don't think that's about the colour of people's skin. I think that is purely about the system collapsing over time, and people, therefore, have taken the view, rightly or wrongly, but that is the connection that they've made.
I think that's half the story, but it's not the whole story. It used to be the case that the people who overwhelmingly came to Britain liked who we were. They wanted to come to Britain to be like us, to fit in. That isn't the case on the same scale as it used to be.
Who are you pointing the finger at?
Mainly the Muslim population. Islam is a different religion from most of... So you mentioned, John, Catholics from Poland. There's a natural affinity. I welcome Muslims into Britain. They play an important part in our society. But it is an evangelistic religion. It wants to change the societies that it's part of. It doesn't have, that Christianity has, a different theory of rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's. When it merges religion and state. We need to confront that, and we must.
So one of the great forces in South London, where I live, are the evangelical black churches.
Yes.
And I love them. Christianity's evangelical as well. And
yes, but we're a Christian country, John.
We're not a Christian country.
We are.
The way that you play with Islamophobia is the toxic core of the reform agenda. That basically you go, there are good migrants, and so like my family, I've got Sikhs in my family. You probably say they're okay because they're Sikhs. There's no distinction between different colours of brown in our country. All brown people have rights to be here, have rights to live here.
Everyone
they have the right to their faith. And it's not my problem that the chaos and the collapse of the Anglican Church means that there are more people going to mosque every week than going to church. That's a problem for the Anglican Church, not a problem for Muslim people.
Quick response, Tim, and then I want to ask my memorial Keir Starmer question.
It's not the problem or fault of Muslims not to do. It's our problem for not being demanding of what we expect of people who come here.
All right, you've each got 10 seconds. Will Keir Starmer be here on New Year's Day?
Well, if Reform win the Makersfield by-election, very possibly. But I've stopped doing predictions in politics. I don't have a good track record.
What do you think, Joe?
No, I don't think he will. I think he will be lent upon if needed. I think he will finally recognise it's time. But it massively depends on what happens in June.
Not a chance. The women in grey frocks are going to go in there and give him the revolver.
The what? The women in grey frocks?
Women in
Why do
grey
you have to wear
frocks.
grey?
Not the men in grey
Why
suits.
can't they be women in orange suits?
OK, great new concept.
Trevor,
Women in grey suits. That's it for us. See you next week, 08:30 Sunday morning.
I urge you not to look away. If Hamas hands the hostages over, they will end this conflict. The world has been watching. Good to see you again. How are you? Did she say how he was?
The conditions are awful.
The jets were ordered to come back. Historic day here today. How will you respond if India does launch airstrikes?
They will be all out to war.
I'm just going to put some body armor on. I'm Yalda Hakim.
This is Sky News Today. It's 10 o'clock. The headlines. America's most senior diplomat says a deal to end the war with Iran and reopen the Strait of Hormuz could be announced within hours. Reporters run for cover after a gunman opens fire at the White House.
Only for the two sides to remain far apart.
Plus, temperatures soar again across the UK. Will we hit a record high? And who's going down? Either West Ham or Tottenham will be relegated today. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. America's most senior diplomat has suggested that an agreement between the United States and Iran could be announced within hours. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that progress had been made on an outline that could see the Strait of Hormuz reopened. That's one, of course, of the world's busiest shipping lanes. Speaking from New Delhi, he also reiterated that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon.
We've made some progress over the last 48 hours working with our partners in the Gulf region on an outline that could ultimately, if it succeeds, leave us not just with a completely open straits, and I mean open straits without tolls, and with addressing some of the key things that underpin what has been Iran's nuclear weapons ambitions in the past. But I do think perhaps there is the possibility that over the next few hours, the world will get some good news, at least with regards to the straits and with regards to a process that can ultimately leave us where the president wants us to be. And that is a world that no longer has to be in fear or worry about an Iranian nuclear weapon.
Well, we won't know exactly what has been agreed unless and until it's actually announced. But reports from Washington and Iranian news agencies suggest the two sides are negotiating around a 60-day ceasefire, during which the Strait of Hormuz would reopen and mines cleared from the water. The U.S. would also lift its blockade on Iranian ports and waive some sanctions so Iran can sell oil freely. But the question of what happens to Iran's nuclear program will require more talks. Our correspondent Sally Lockwood joins us now from Dubai. So, Sally, obviously the nuclear issue is going to be one of the biggest stumbling blocks, but there does seem to be focus on the Strait of Hormuz, but all of this very tenuous still.
Yes, that's right. I mean, it's certainly encouraging that we're at least reporting on diplomatic efforts being very much alive still between the US and Iran, despite a lot of concern in the last week or so that we would see a return to military action from the US and Israel. So there is a sense of relief, I would say, that in this region that hasn't happened. But there's also a sense of caution in terms of the amount of work there is to do when it comes to diplomacy. But certainly very encouraging signals from America's Secretary of State Marco Rubio in India, speaking about how we could see some sort of news in the coming hours when it comes to the situation in the Strait of Hormuz. But Marco Rubio was cautious in his optimism. He also said, you know, you can agree things on paper, but they actually have to be implemented. And I think that is very much where we are this morning. You've got Donald Trump saying that they are very close to announcing some sort of negotiated memorandum of understanding. And then we're receiving regular updates every few minutes this morning. We've had updates from Iran's Tasnim news agency giving an indication of Iran's position when it comes to this negotiated proposal, a framework for how the next round of ceasefire talks or peace talks will go. And certainly Donald Trump announced last night on Truth Social that this would include the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, which would not involve tolls, and that Iran would clear the Strait of mines to help with safe passage for commercial shipping to resume. And in return, the US would lift the naval blockade on Iranian maritime